I'm Louise Kinross, and I produce Bloom, which is Holland Bloor View's magazine on parenting children with disabilities. A few years ago, I got a call from ABC's 2020. Sorry, this is... A reporter there was doing a story about Carly and wanted to know if he could film her swimming here. That was the first time that I'd heard about Carly. And the reporter told me that Carly had autism and couldn't speak, but at age 10, she had started to type words on a computer. In Carly's voice, her dad, Arthur, captures what it's like to be the parent of a child who can't express her thoughts. There was so much I wanted for her, simple things, impossible things, he writes, recalling another sleepless night where Carly kept tearing her room apart. It was 5:30 in the morning, and Carly had finally fallen asleep. "Carly, I want you to be calm and happy," he whispered. "I want you to speak. I want you to play and have friends and go to school." That longing to hear his child's voice and to see her participate is shared by all parents whose children struggle to communicate. I'm delighted that Arthur is here today to share his family's journey and what he's learned. For the first part, we're going to do an interview, then we'll have a quick break, and then we'll come back for an open Q&A. Welcome, Arthur.
Thank you. You're multitasking. Yeah. Wow.
So, can everyone hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of reverb.
So I think a lot of people here will probably know a bit about Carly's story or read the book, and I thought it might be nice for us to start with you updating us on what Carly's doing right now.
Okay, in a way that's a great place to finish too. You know, it's funny, I wrote the book and then I put it away. Like, I've lived the life, so I haven't actually wanted to reread it again. And so to hear you read some of the passages was actually quite helpful. Well, I'm a Canadian now, when I think about, is that better? When I think about where I was back then when I was thinking about that passage, so she would have been maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years old or something, and I was thinking I want her to have all these sort of nice, simple, basic things that all other kids have, I could never imagine that she would be where she's at today. So those of you who follow her on Facebook know that 2-3 weeks ago, she moved into a dorm at University of Toronto Victoria College and signed up as a BA candidate working on a degree in English. And she's only taking a couple of courses at a time, but she's taking English Lit, full-size course. So she's in a huge auditorium-style class. And she's taking a seminar. Vic College has, I think they're allowed to take 1 seminar a year, so 9 students in a class. And that one's on technology and human interaction, which we all joke she'll be teaching by the middle of the semester. She'll be like, let me tell you how it works. You know, when I think about this, and so the setup there, and this is not a plug for U of T, but of course it's a plug for U of T because it's just the most unbelievable school I've ever encountered. They offered us a 3-bedroom suite because they said if she really wants to live on campus and have a campus experience, she needs certain supports. As we understand, she can't do that in a dorm. That wouldn't be really appropriate for her. So she's in the Jackman dorm, which is a big dorm, but it has a floor or 2 with three-room suites. So we picked 2 roommates for her. Well, we put out an ad, and then she interviewed about 10 roommates, picked 2 of them, and in exchange for room and board, they support her at night. So if she wakes up at night, they're there to help her and guide her back, you know, from the bathroom and so forth. But she's really been working on independence, so she hasn't needed a lot of help yet in the past few weeks. So she's got these 2 regular roommates. One's a 3rd-year psych student, one's a PhD candidate, and Carly. And that way she said, if I go out and I want to go to a party, I'm with someone who's more my age. I'm not hanging out with someone's mom. It's just been an unbelievable experience. You know, I talked to, I know what it was, the psychologist who oversees her. She still has sort of ABA-like programming, not really programming, but support. And the psychologist said, you know, one of the things you got to be aware of as a parent, she's at school and stuff happens at school, right? There's sex, there's drugs, there's booze, there's all this sort of stuff, and you need to have this conversation with her like you do with her twin sister. And so my wife and I talked about it. We said, okay, what would that mean? And we said, okay, well, if she's in her room and she's studying with a boy. You know, we need to have some protocols so that her roommates know what they're supposed to allow and not allow. If she goes to a party, is she allowed to drink? If someone offers her a joint, is she allowed to smoke a joint? I mean, these are the things kids deal with in school. So I sat down with Tammy and we laid out the protocol, and I kind of wrote it up to Carly, and I said, you know, I really want your input because you're an adult now, but this is what we think. And she went, stop. She sent me a note back. She said, I've become my parents already. I already had this discussion with my roommates and my therapist, and here's what we agreed. And she wrote out a more stringent list of protocols for herself than I would have even given her. I'm like, you want a drink? Sure, whatever. No, I'm kidding. But no. She actually had she said, you know, I'm actually quite nervous about boys in my room with me. I like boys, but I'm still nervous. I'm vulnerable. So if I'm studying with a boy in my room, I want the door open. I want my roommates to check in on me every once in a while because I can't really call out for help. Alcohol, she said, by the way, Dad, I've been drinking all summer up at the cottage. You didn't know. And we've determined that alcohol doesn't really affect me. So I want them not to let me have more than one drink. Like, I should never be allowed to have more than one drink because it's not safe. Oh my God, can you just send this to your sister at McGill because she's doing the woo, you know, kind of like, Bob and Dad are gone. So that's her. She is essentially a normal freshman student at University of Toronto. And that is just, for anyone who has read the book or followed the story and knows where she started, almost inconceivable. Certainly for us, it's inconceivable.
And Howard is still one of her workers.
Yeah,
is that right?
So it is kind of funny. So Howard, the first person on the team was Barb Nash Fenton, who is her speech-language pathologist, and she worked with Carly starting at age 2 at a school called Zerenu, and stayed with Carly in private practice after Carly left Zerenu at age 4 or 5, and would come to our house every Monday, sometimes twice a week, sometimes by email. They worked together. And the two are, Howard and Barb are like frick and frack. They were just connected at the hip for 10 years. They strategized together. They worked together. They planned together. I should say all three of them. They really were inseparable. And Barb continued, I actually don't even know if Carly knows this, but Barb is sort of feeling that this is now the year that she should start pulling back. Last year she would come to the house and really was doing more sort of grammar and editing of her work, which is not really, you don't really need a speech-language pathologist to do that, but because of Carly's OCD, she was becoming routine-based with Barb, and so the only person who could edit her writing was Barb. And if anyone else edited her writing, she would freak out. So it's like, okay, we're dealing with enough here, we'll let Barb edit her writing, and then she'll email it back to her, like, we'll deal with it. But now Carly is working so hard to master her OCD through various cognitive behavioral therapy strategies that we think now is the year that we'll stop with the regular Barb sessions. That's not to say Barb will leave her life. She won't. I mean, she'll be there for the rest of their natural lives. I mean, they'll talk all the time and they'll visit all the time, but I just don't think we need Barb one-on-one with her doing editing because she's got tutors and things like that at school she can use. Howard, on the other hand, is not leaving or we'll kill him. That is basically the deal. We said we will hunt you down and we will kill you. So Howard is, however, changing his protocol with her. He, excuse me, I've had this allergy or cold for a while. He works with her. Last year, he and Vidrana, a young woman, split the day at Northern, at the high school. And one would work mornings and one would work afternoons into the evening. Howard took afternoon into the evening, and it isn't ideal because he's married, has 2 kids of his own. So this year they've flipped it. So he now comes in the morning and he goes to whatever she has between 7:30 and noon. Howard is with her. So if there's a class, he goes to class with her as her note taker, or they use that time to study, go to the library, what have you. And then Vidrana comes and works noon to about 9 o'clock and does the same thing, either class and studying, and then takes her to the cafeteria for dinner and, you know, to go out in the evening. I got a text last week from Vidrana, and she said, I don't know, Carly asked if we could get dressed up and go to a lounge tonight. And I said, does she know she's a student? Like, first of all, I don't mind if she gets dressed up and goes off campus with you. That's totally cool. But don't kids go to the Rex or the Madison or something like that?
Yeah.
Now, like, who the hell goes to a lounge? You know, like, tell her she's got to live on a student budget and she can't drink legally anyhow. So you can, anyway, long story short, they just went like to the Hyatt for a Diet Coke or something. But it was very cool. Like, it was very cool to get this text. And so she's, you know, Vidrana's a young woman and very attractive and kind of fun to be with. So that works out well for Carly. And so that's their team. Yeah.
So I guess take us back. I'm thinking as a dad and wondering what the greatest challenges were when Carly was much younger. So when you think about the passage that I read, describe to us what the greatest challenges were then.
I think the challenges maybe come sort of in two levels. There's the physical challenge. And how many of you have a family member or care for a family member with autism? Okay, so probably close to half. How many of them are, well, let's say, under the age of teens? Like, they're more, yeah. Okay, and the rest are teenagers? Teens, yeah. Okay, so you've been through all this. You know this. You're going to know this story. You're going to finish my sentences for me. So the first level is physical care, right? The challenges are physical care. So Carly never slept, and by that I don't mean had sleepless nights. I mean never slept, did not sleep. You know, would get into bed at 10, we'd read a story, or 9:30, whatever, 10, read a story for an hour or so. She would sort of be quiet or asleep just long enough to lull me into a false sense of calm. I might go downstairs, watch some TV or finish some work or whatever, hang out with the other kids, and then she'd be up. Or maybe I'd get into bed and fall asleep. You know, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I'm asleep. Then she'd get up and she'd start to strip her bed and dump everything out of cupboards and run downstairs and empty the refrigerator. And it was many years before we understood this was more compulsive behavior than anything else, and we didn't understand why she was doing it for many, many years. Much later, she could tell us it was more of a compulsive drive. It was not a, you know, she wasn't being naughty. She wasn't being like a little 2-year-old who's naughty and curious. She was just compelled to strip the bed, and if she couldn't strip the bed, it hurt. Like, it would physically cause her pain. But she would have many of these layers. So it would be stripping the bed, dumping the drawers, emptying this, overflowing the tub, all of these things on a standard night. So that's an enormous challenge, like just trying to get through day after day after day like that. The follow-up question I know is going to be, how did we do it? And I don't even want to tackle that question because I don't know. Like, I don't know. You just freaking do it, right? Like, anyone who does, like, what is the option? Like, when people say, I don't know how you do it, you go, and the option would be, or, you know, it's time that you guys just, you know, stop this with the ABA and everything else. And the option would be, what exactly? Like, you know, put her in a bag? Like, what am I going to do? Like, she's moving around all the time. So, so you got that, and then you've got, you know, the inability to go places and do things. Even as like a little baby, or whatever, a toddler, she was in the stroller once, and we had a nanny at the time. I think she had both of them in a double McLaren stroller, and they had walked into the little party shop or something on Yonge Street to get a card or something. And Tasia gets home and she realizes in the stroller are like 5 items that Carly had just lifted off the shelves. And it's like, okay, she was young, but not, she was too old to have done that, right? Like, her twin sister wasn't doing that because she knew the difference between stealing and buying. So back to the store to return everything. So, you know, it's this sort of thing. Some things are kind of cute, some things were not cute at all. The destruction and the, she ran out of the house one night at about 7 years old. That's how we opened the book. Right around, you know, like this kind of thing, sort of dusk, 7:15, 7:30. I was just getting home. My wife was at a meeting. We did have the nanny at home with Carly's twin, Taryn, and Matthew was home. And I guess Tasia went up to fill the tub and get ready, and Carly just slipped out the back door and ran from where we live, north of Eglinton, sort of near Lawrence and west of Duplex. You know, that area's kind of busy. And she got all the way to a little parkette just next to Yonge Street and Alexandra. So she got about 4 or 5 blocks across very busy streets at dusk. And we found her there like 45 minutes later. There was a woman sort of watching her, not really sure what to do. She's like, I didn't know what to do. And then we realized at that point, you got to have a medical bracelet with a name and a phone number and a little description, because she doesn't speak. And so you're looking at this kid and you know something's wrong, but you don't know what's wrong. So these kinds of things are like the first level of challenge, and they just take sheer physical tenacity. It takes 2 to 10 people to manage it, and just sheer tenacity. Then comes the emotional layer that we as Canadians don't talk about, and men never talk about, because we would never talk about this stuff unless we had to write a book. And that's just that whole loss of hope, right? Like that's the whole, okay, so today is awful and tomorrow's going to be awful and the next day is going to be awful. Fine, maybe I can get till Saturday and then maybe we'll get a babysitter and we'll go out for dinner or something. But what is going to happen next month and next year and 5 years from now and 20 years from now when Taryn, you know, goes to the prom and then goes away to university and then gets married and has kids and they all move away and they have careers and lives and Carly is stripping the bed and she's a 30-year-old living at home, destroying the house and doing nothing essentially, or living in a group home, which is what they told us to do with her. And you just try not to think about that, because what, you know, you almost think like, what's the point? Like, why go through this every day if the outcome is going to be my kid heavily sedated, you know, in some group home? Or we went to see some group homes, and there was a girl named, I wrote about this in the book too, named Carla, which kind of freaked me out. And it was at a respite home. And this little girl, clearly a young woman, clearly had never had any therapy or any involvement or you know, engagement. And they had her hands all bandaged up because she used to bite them. And so the only way they could get her to stop biting through her skin was to bandage them. And she didn't respond to, you know, anything, any kind of stimulus. And, you know, we'd see her and we'd see Carly, 10 years younger, and we'd say, so this becomes that. And it just gives you this sense of complete loss. Like, you know, like, how do you even bother? What do you do? So I'd say that, in a way, that is the more insidious and difficult thing that parents deal with. Like, you can you can often find someone to help you, a babysitter. If you have the means, you can get a nanny. You can, if you're lucky enough to have grandparents who will help. We weren't, but if you were, that's great. You can get the physical help, and even some of those physical things will get better over time. But that loss of hope never goes away. And that's the kind of thing that's what keeps you up at night, not even the banging around and all that. When you're lying there at night going, you know, what's the upshot of all this? What's the silver lining? Because there's got to be a frickin' silver lining here somewhere. So I'd say those would be the two biggest challenges, physical and emotional. And I won't even touch the financial, because anyone who deals with this knows that it's, you know, financially devastating. And, you know, we get some flack because we are upper middle class. I understand that. We're incredibly lucky to be able to have provided the things to Carly that we provide her with. And yet, after all is said and done, I'm pushing 52, should be looking toward retirement. I am nowhere near ready for retirement. I mean, there's no way I could live on what we've put away for retirement, whereas my partners are all going, yep,
3 years
bring it on. Yeah, 3 years, bring it on. I got this, you know, the cottage and the house all paid for. And I'm going, great, that's fantastic. I got to start saving for my retirement, and, you know, 3 years left to work. So the financial drain is, again, I don't even know what to say about that, because there's no federal act to support us. There's some funding that comes and goes that has gotten harder and harder to access. They've now thrown up all sorts of roadblocks and red tape and barriers to try to, you know, humiliate us, I think, into not submitting the forms and getting the money. So that's, you know, so money, physical, emotional. You know, tell me when you want me to stop. So.
No, this is great.
It's like, pour us drinks, you know.
No, I love the book. I love the book because you were so candid, and that's what makes it so meaningful to parents, I think.
Well, you know, it's when we were asked to write the book, I didn't really have any intention to do it. I do write a little bit for work, but not generally creative writing. It's more business writing. And I said to Carly, if you want to do it, I'll do it, because it's an interesting creative challenge, and I love challenges like that. But I don't want to do, there are a number of books out there, and I'm not going to diss any of them, but they're all sort of rose-colored glasses, and, you know, they'll tell you the last 2 minutes of a basketball game when, you know, the boy sunk the basket, and these are wonderful, but they just don't match my reality. Like, our reality was dirty and messy and challenging and sad and all that. Now, it has a beautiful outcome, so that's the only reason that you read the first 150 pages, because you'd slit your wrist on the back 9 if, you know, if it was as bad as the front 9. But it was the only way to tell the story. And I said to Carly, if you don't want to do it, and you'll have, you know, first right of refusal on any of this, we won't do it. And she said, no, write the book. And I actually saved that email. It was, write the book. You know, that's all she wrote. But I vetted everything with her, and especially, I wrote it even worse, and then we pulled back on certain experiences and things that we thought would be embarrassing for her, or you know, that she just didn't want out there in the world.
Sure. I know when you and I were talking, you spoke about how you maybe got 2 to 3 hours of sleep at night. And then you were heading up this successful advertising agency. And so I know you were kind of saying earlier, you know, you don't have a choice, this is what you do. Yeah. But I'm wondering, how did you do that? How did you go in every day?
You always have to ask the question, right? Everyone wants to know the question. That question always comes. You know what? So I think when we chatted.
How are you creative? How could you?
Well, I'm the business guy, right? So I don't have to be quite as creative. I just have to, you know.
But still,
yeah.
I mean, how do you?
No, so you have to be sharp, right? Everyone has to be mentally sharp. It doesn't matter what you do. You know, it doesn't matter what your career. It doesn't matter whether you even have a career. You got to be mentally sharp to just live life, to pay your bills and clean the house and, you know, do that kind of stuff. I think, one, I'm very lucky. I don't need a ton of sleep. I don't think I've slept now since July. Yeah, I think like the 16th of July or something. I don't sleep a ton anyhow. I go to bed at reasonable hours, but even today, my sleep is incredibly disrupted. I wake up every couple of hours. Although now, because I'm middle-aged and I have to pee every, couple of hours. But even if I didn't, I would still wake up. I think also I really tried to focus on taking care of myself, which I was able to do. Again, I was very, very fortunate because my wife and I could divide and conquer a lot of the tasks. So I made sure that I ate properly. I think the only thing, and I don't mind admitting this, probably the only thing is I probably consume more alcohol than I should, and that seems to be a common trait. We can joke about it because it clearly was not a serious issue, but we would talk with all of our friends in the autism community. Whenever we got together for chats or whatever, there was always sushi, chocolate, and wine. I don't know why, but that just seemed to be the common thing. So maybe that was not so good, but I definitely ate very healthfully and I exercised a lot. My son is as ungifted an athlete as I am, so we took karate together and we stayed with that till we both got our black belts, so we trained. At night there was always that nice little window, sort of 7:30, which is after work, to 9. So we still, like our nanny, we shifted her hours so she would come later and stay a bit later. And so she would get the girls ready for bed. I could sneak out for an hour with Matthew. We would do our karate. And I found that physical activity, regular physical activity and a healthy diet probably helped a bit. Good genes, like good luck with that. I have a lot of energy. I'm 83. I know I lied. I'm
actually,
I know, right?
When Arthur walked in, I thought it was one of our students.
I know, you don't look 83.
Or researchers, or
you don't
young
look 83.
researchers.
It's great. So yeah, but I don't want to say that because that actually puts more pressure on people. What I've heard when I say that to people, they get really annoyed at me. It's like, oh, you, because I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to cook myself a healthy meal. I'm lucky if I can get a bowl of cereal. So that's why I don't love answering that question, because it puts unfair pressure on, it's one more thing that people have to deal with. Oh, great, now I've got to exercise and take care of myself.
But I think in the book that you were candid enough that people are able to see that you went through really dark times.
Yes.
I mean, and I think that was really important that you spoke about that, and you spoke about your wife Tammy's depression, and I think that too often we don't talk about the mental health impacts.
No, we talk about how easy things are and how wonderful things are, and any of us who've gone through it or know anyone who's gone through it just know that that cannot be a true story. Like, there's no way. The best artists and athletes and business people make everything look easy, and on the outside everything looks easy, and it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, anyone who has done any kind of sport knows that it is not easy. So that is kind of what happens. You look at our life and go, wow, that looked so easy. And I didn't think it did anyone any good to perpetuate that lie, because it's...
And it sounded like you coped very differently, you and Tammy. I'm just wondering if you can describe kind of how you coped and then how she coped.
Yeah, and some days better than others, right, for each of us. I think for me, my brain compartmentalizes, probably much to her frustration, and maybe it's a male-female thing, as sort of as I can understand it, there is a bit of a male-female thing there. I think women are integrators. I understand from my pop psychology studying, women integrate better and men separate better. And so for me, it was easier to leave the house in the morning, put on music, drive to work, and by the time I got to work, pretty much block out everything that had happened that night. I'm also extremely fortunate that I have a really wonderful place to work, like the environment, the culture, my partners, my clients. Stressful, no doubt, and a lot of hard work. but they're caring, they have fantastic sense of humor. You know, they're sort of those alpha types who are very quick-witted, and there's lots of interesting stuff going on. So I could put away all the crap that was happening in my house, immerse myself in this culture. You get a tremendous sense of accomplishment in building a business and winning awards, and so you could go to work and feel really good about yourself, and that would kind of boost yourself up at night. Now, my wife's way of conquering things is to just dive right into the mess, right? Like, if there's grief, you got to get right in there, and if there's no funding, then we better get ourselves funding, and if they try to screw with us, then we better bring the battle back to them. And she still does that today. I mean, it's hard because she suffers from a number of health issues herself. So in between that, she went through 2 bouts with cancer, and she's had depression and so forth. So yeah, has to retire for a matter of months, and then she just gets right back in there. There's a term for you autism moms. What do they call you? Autism warriors or autism tigers or something like that? Yeah, I was the autism pussycat, and she was the autism warrior or something.
I thought that was really important, too, that you shared about her illnesses, because I think so often as parents, we almost feel like we can't get sick. There's a fear.
Well, you can't, actually.
There's a fear of, well, what are you going to do?
Well, what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just one more of those things that life deals to you. You know, and in the first round through, you know, the good news was she had been so sick for so long that the chemo actually made her feel better in a way once she, you know, you kind of go through the tired and all that, you know. But the second time through, as she said, it wasn't as much fun. Like, it was just harder. She was older. She was 36 the first time, 32, 36, and 40-something, maybe it was 10 years later. So you're tired, you know, 40, I mean, 40-something's not old, but 3 kids, 8 rounds of chop, you're tired, and then you go through it again, right? So it was harder, but Carly was a bit older. The support systems were a little bit more in place. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Everything kind of blurs now. Yeah, I think Carly would have been, right? Oh yeah, Carly was writing and everything by then. Yeah, so she was already 13, 14, something like that. So we were past some of the really horrific years at that point.
So tell us a bit about how Carly first began to express her thoughts. And it'd be great if you cleared up some of the misconceptions that I think came from some of the American media coverage, that it wasn't an overnight thing.
No, for sure. Yeah, and that's unfair to people too, because they kind of look and they go, my kid didn't get that miracle, so, you know, screw her, which we've gotten a lot of that. We have gotten a lot of that. So Carly was one of the hardest working people I've ever met. So she was diagnosed at 2, and probably 15 minutes later she was hard at work, right? Like, we started with ABA therapy and physiotherapy and speech language and music therapy and all sorts of things at age 2, 2.5. And part and parcel of that is various forms of communication. So Barb was strategizing first with prompt and all different ways to try to get her to actually communicate out of her mouth, then sign language, but Carly has really horrible coordination and gross motor and fine motor skill. Well, her gross motor is not terrible, her fine motor is awful. So she can't sign. Like, she still does, like, you know, more and finished, but that's, and then she's got ones that she made up, I think. Like, we know what they mean, but no, they're certainly not in the international sign book, whatever. So that wasn't working so good. Then we moved on to PECs, which is very helpful, but in the old days, it was stacks of cards, right? So you break your back carrying around all the cards, and it's fine for, like, pineapple and, you know, broccoli, but what happens when it's, you know, my knee itches and, you know, I can't reach it, or something, I can't communicate these things. So, so we did PECs, and all of those had words on the back. So presumably she was seeing the spelling and seeing the word. Then we moved on to, through Blue Review, we moved on to is it a DynaVox or something? One of the Easy Write. It was before the Easy Write, because she wasn't writing. That one. It was the precursor to the iPad. DynaWrite came later, though. That was for writing, right? So it was the DynaVox at first, because that was like a precursor to an iPad, right? And it was awful, because, you know, you touch one square and the other thing lights up, and it's like, touch that one up. So the technology wasn't great, but again, it had pictures and words. And then they started to introduce things using flashcards with letters on it. So they would lay out letters and they might say, like they might put out C-A-R, D-O-G, which one's dog? And so she could point to dog reliably, start at 50-50, not so good, 70, 80, 90%. You realized, okay, she's starting to memorize letter patterns into words. And that's not a bad thing either, even if you can't, write. Then once she mastered that, they would use Boggle chips or Scrabble chips and try to create words and play different games with her. And we realized she at least had the ability to memorize word patterns, words of 2, 3, 5 letters. And so again, that's not a bad thing, because that's certainly easier than pictures on everything. And then we would label everything in the house. That's a window, Carly, window. And you talk to her like she's 2 or whatever. Meanwhile, she's probably flipping you the bird. Going, I know it's a fucking window, Dad. But you don't know that, right? So you're doing window, Carly. Then one day we were away. We had learned that you can't always go away with Carly. So we took the other 2 kids away and we went to the Grand Canyon, which was an amazing trip for us. It was a spring break trip. And Carly stayed home with Nanny and the 2 or 3 rounds of therapists and stuff that we had planned for her. And Howard called us and he said, Carly has been acting just really cranky all day and just totally out of control. And she had typed the words, as you probably saw, help, teeth, hurt. And the part that I didn't put in the book, because I didn't realize the significance of it, and Barb was like, I told you, put it in the book. After she typed the word, she then went back to the picture screen and pointed to the letter, to the images of help. There's a help, I don't know what the symbol is, but help and hurt. So she typed out help, teeth, hurt, and then she went back to the picture screen on the device and typed the pictures, or pointed to the pictures of help and hurt, and then she threw up. And as she explains in the book, she didn't know how to say teeth hurt. She couldn't say vomit. She didn't know how to say that, and she sort of felt funny in her mouth. So that was the closest she could approximate to, I feel like I'm going to vomit. So was there some sort of miraculous breakthrough? Yeah, I suppose there was, in that she went from this memorization and pointing to words that were spelled out to spontaneously putting this thought together in her head and typing it out on a device that she had never typed on before. And then we realized, of course, you got to move beyond the DynaVox and get to a light writer, and then eventually laptops and iPads and iTouches and all that sort of thing. But that was a very slow process, right? I mean, she went from 2 to 10 without writing it at all. And then from 10 and a bit, for the rest of that year, she went on a hiatus. She wrote for a while and then stopped for a couple of months, would not write a word. And then she wrote a very, very powerful short letter to Barb about Tammy. And they got into a bit of a battle of wills, as you will, with Carly. And then sort of haltingly wrote. And then she would use instant messaging, which was very big in those days. And she would communicate a lot with me on IM. And it would be very short things like, can we go for a walk? Can we go for pizza? And that's where she started to expose that she had a sense of humor. And, she would say things like, went to the zoo today. Hey, that's really cool. Great, Carly. What was your favorite animal? Saw Matthew. Matthew's her older brother. Saw Matthew there. I said, no, don't think so. He was at school today. Maybe she's confused, because you don't know, right? Like, not sure what she sees. And we thought she was, to be honest, we still thought she was intellectually impaired at the time, because we were told she was probably at the age of a 3 to 6 or 7-year-old. Like, we were told she was like a child. And then she said, no, had same hair, smelled like him too. And then she's like, in the cage. And now you're really confused, because you don't understand that she has a sense of humor, right? Like, if you didn't know that I like to joke around and I said to you, oh no, it was great. I saw your brother at the zoo. He was in the cage. You go, okay, this person is like, they're just, they're delusional. But she wasn't delusional. She just had this, crazy sense of humor. And bit by bit, the sense of humor would come out. And a lot of the professionals didn't believe it at first. She was with Dr. Geist at Sick Kids when she was going through a really bad period at, now I'm trying to remember if that was just after or just before her bat mitzvah. It's when they finally put her on medication, but the doctor was staring at her, and they noticed that she was kind of doing this, and then she'd smile and then stop smiling, and she said, you know, I wonder, the doctor said, I wonder if she's having rapid cycling, because it's not unusual for people with rapid cycling, with mood disorders, to maybe see or imagine things, you know, and so she said, Carly, do you ever, you know, sort of see things or imagine things? And Carly responded, I see dead people. To which we're like, okay, and I hadn't seen the movie. What's that, Sixth Sense? Is it Sixth Sense? So I hadn't seen the movie. So I'm like, I knew she was kidding, but I'm like, everyone else is laughing, and of course Dad is out to lunch. So then she said, no, I have jokes in my head. And we said, what are jokes? And she said, Howie, your fly's down. You know, your fly's down made you look, that kind of. So then we started to realize, okay, this is a kid with a very sharp sense of humor, and you know, just a cockeyed look on the world that is really kind of cool.
And what were some other surprises? Because I know you talked about
Yeah.
how you got
To know her more, and how there were surprises about who she was as a person.
Well, you know what, every day is a surprise with her. We'll talk about that. Maybe we'll end toward the end with that
Sure.
one later. But I don't know who here knows what a bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah is, or the protocol around that. But it's a coming of age thing in the Jewish religion for girls and boys. And it is customary for them, for boys and girls, it's customary to write a little speech. Usually it's called a Devar Torah. It's usually an observation on the Torah portion that they read that day in the synagogue. Carly couldn't read that because she can't read Hebrew, but Barb was convinced she should play a role in this joint bat mitzvah with her sister. And so I thought she meant, you know, maybe open the cabinet where the Torah is, and she said, no, she should write something. And at this point, she was really just starting to write, you know, sort of simple sentences, you know, paragraphs, things like that. And so she says, I'm going to write the speech, and she starts writing the speech, and it took her about 3 or 4 months, but it was a long speech. It was probably 10 minutes. And if anyone who's written a speech, filling 10 minutes of content, there's a lot of words there. So she wrote this thing out, and she said, she sends me a note, she says, I want someone special to read it. So of course I thought she meant me. I'm like, ah, shucks, you know, sure, I'll read it for you. And she just, you know, blazes on, ignoring me, essentially. And she says, no, she's blonde, she's on TV, her name's Ellen. Maybe she didn't even tell me initially that it was Ellen, but eventually she said, I can't pronounce her last name, it's too funny to spell. And, you know, Carly doesn't sit and watch TV because she didn't sit, she never sits, but we, again, eventually learned that she picks up on stuff. She just sort of sees with this tremendous peripheral vision. And she really liked Ellen's style and her self-deprecating approach, and I guess at some point Ellen told stories about how hard it was to be gay in the South when she was a kid, and so Carly identified with, you know, sort of the underdog and so forth. And then she, you know, she really pushed and pushed and pushed to get to Ellen, and of course everyone works for Carly, so we all kind of put our heads together and figured out how to reach Ellen through a publicity connection. And, you know, so we started to learn a bunch of things. We learned in how she wrote the speech, we learned a lot about her, we learned about this sort of celebrity star stupor kind of thing, like she just loves celebrities, and so we sort of started to, you know, really see this other vision. And I think the thing that I learned the most was through the speech and through this thing you also do with your bat mitzvah. You're supposed to do a charitable act, and it can either be volunteer work or this sort of thing. She said, what I want to do, I love to bake, and I love food, so I want to bake some food, and I want to go buy food at a store, and I want to bring it to a mission, to a homeless shelter. And so she organized it. She kind of told us what we were all going to do, and we all did it with her. And she wrote about that in the speech. And so you just started to see these multi-layers of her personality that in ways were far ahead of her twin sister. Like, you know, Taryn is an amazing kid too, but at 11 or 12 years old, she was a very typical 11 or 12-year-old. Like, the world totally centered around her. You know, like if you drew the map, it would be like Taryn, and then the earth just kind of falls off on all sides. And charitable act, it was like, sure, I'll do it if I have to. You know, I can get, what is it in high schools now? Like, you can get volunteer hours, but they'll do it for anything, like serving pizza at, you know, like a spirit night. She clocked 2 hours to her volunteer thing. And Taryn's like, yay. Meanwhile, Carly's like, no, we got to bake cookies and bring them down to the mission in the middle of the night kind of thing. So you saw a lot of layers of her personality, and this charitable side, we can get back to it later. As social media grew and her knowledge and her use of social media, she's very gifted in social media strategy. As that expanded, we started to see that was a major pillar of her personality. And she's done all sorts of major global volunteer efforts at this point. And I don't really know where that comes from. I mean, Tammy and I are quite, we're kind of charitable, but it is not our calling. We don't work in the not-for-profit sector. We don't volunteer hours of our week or whatever, but she has this calling, and and every day we just learn something new about her. So sense of humor, sense of spirit, connection with the celebrity world. She just loves them, and she's totally unafraid, like unabashed about that. She's written to Brad Pitt and all sorts of. Well, she's actually had relationships, either television interviews or she's visited, Holly Robinson, and she's gotten involved in these things, and absolutely no fear.
Yeah.
No fear. So
it's amazing.
It's really cool.
So when we spoke the other day, actually it was yesterday, wasn't that long ago?
Don't lie. It was yesterday.
Many of the most moving parts I found in the book centered around your recognition that Carly couldn't live with you full time.
Yeah.
That was just too much. And I thought that was a really important part or point in the book for other families. And I thought that a lot of times we don't talk about respite care or residential care.
Right.
And you were able to have an arrangement where she was in residential care for 3 nights every week.
At the worst, it was 4.
Or 4
nights
a week.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's a really important part of your story. And I'm wondering how that helped your family manage, because it obviously did.
Yeah, I think that it's like anything else. You sort of have to work your way up to it. It's like any kind of, it's almost like training for a marathon. You sort of have to start by running a block or whatever. And we used to use occasional respite care through, first one I think was through Carrie's Place. And they were wonderful. I mean, they really, really saved our life, but it would be like one weekend every couple of months. No, there was another one before that. I want to say it was Lawson or something, and that was, as our friend said, you're doing it for yourself, not for her. I mean, the place was clean. I'm not worried about her being abused or whatever, but it was basically a converted old school. So it was quite institutional, and the staff there really had no idea what, they basically sat on the couch and watched the kids kind of do that. So they kept them out of trouble, but they didn't do anything. They didn't know how to engage a kid with severe autism. But, 48 hours once every month or two, it gave us a chance just to catch our breath and nap a little bit or spend some time with the other kids, what have you. And I think that helped, it helped us realize that it's not great, but you might have to do that kind of thing. And then a friend of ours, a couple who had twin boys with autism, were sending one or both of them to this place part-time north of the city. And we had a lot of regard for them. I mean, it's one of the things about the autism families is you look at other people, and we chatted about this, and you go, well, if you can do this and you look like a fine, upstanding human being, then maybe I can do this too. So they were sending their kids up there. I can't remember what the schedule was. Maybe they were up there part-time as well, a few days a week. And so we thought, oh, okay, I guess this is something that you do. I guess this is what you have to do. And we went up there and we talked about a very advanced model where we were sending ABA therapists, some from the local area and some from Toronto, up there to supplement their staff, because we knew that Carly wouldn't get the kind of one-to-one stimulation. At this point, we realized she wasn't, when we started there, she wasn't, I guess she was writing. She was writing a little bit by then, so we knew she had a higher level of intelligence than the doctors thought she had originally. So we thought, okay, this is a kid who's going to need a lot of stimulation and education, and they can't provide that, so we'll send our staff up there. And so we kept ABA going during the week, and it was also our way of spying and keeping an eye on her, making sure that she was clean and healthy and all that sort of thing. And it's bittersweet, right? Because the house almost becomes better than normal, right? Because you have one less than 3 kids, which, yahoo, you got one less than 3 kids. So now they can't outnumber you anymore. You can divide and conquer. And then you take all the chaos and turmoil out of Carly. But there's the guilt. And I remember I used to like to keep her bedroom door closed because I just couldn't stand seeing the open, perfect door, perfect bedroom with the bed all made and fluffed up. And her room always she likes strong scents, like she likes very fruity kind of, she used to, not so much anymore, body cream and that kind of thing. So her room always had a very strong scent to it. And it's like, I just don't even want to, not even going to look there. I'll focus on Taryn and Matthew and the rest of our life. And that went on for, I think she was up there part-time for like 2 or 3 years. And I don't know what to say to other families. I mean, we do talk a bit about this. She absolutely, although there was no criminal action taken, she absolutely suffered an abuse up there. It set her back many years and was horrific. And on that front, I then said, because we were then working to build the first ABA-based group home in Toronto. We did build it and launch it, but we never put Carly there because just before it opened, she suffered this abuse, and we swore we would never put her in a group home again. On the other hand, that's not to say every group home has abuse in it, right? But our worst fears came true. So, again, I'm in this position where I can't tell anyone anything helpful because you will do what you need to do, and you should not feel guilty about it and horrible because you didn't ask for this and you didn't ask for a lack of resources or a lack of a solution or a lack of a cure. And so you got to do what you got to do. This family would not have been able to function with Carly at home 7 days a week. It was just physically not possible. It was getting worse as she went through puberty. Her self-injurious behavior became worse. Her outbursts became horrific. They weren't violent, but they were, she punched holes or banged her head through walls. I can't tell you how many times we had to have plasters in and painting in. I mean, she just, they wanted her to wear a helmet, which, you're not going to walk around in a helmet. So you have to fix the behavior so she's not banging her head on the floor and banging her head on the walls. But you just can't watch that 24/7. So I just can't physically be with her all that time to stop her from doing that. And the shrieking and that noise, the moms will know it even more than the dads, apparently, according to my wife. There's, I think, a physiological reaction that women get even more so than men, that when their child is suffering, that bleeding noise, not bleeding, but bleating noise, that whining noise, for me it would be it's driving me crazy. For my wife, it made her want to kill herself. Like she said, that noise just drives me to the edge because it is the noise of despair and the noise of pain, and there's nothing I can do to help her, and there's nothing I can do to help myself, and this is never going to get better. In that 1 second of bleeding, that's what you thought about. And we couldn't live with that. We just could not have that every day. We needed her to be with someone who wasn't her parent, who didn't have that reaction every time she did it, who could redirect her and calm her down and refocus her, because we couldn't do that. And the staff eventually has to go home. You cannot have someone in your house 24/7, and you don't want someone in your house. So we came to that realization, and we told ourselves it wasn't permanent, although interestingly, the service providers were talking to us about, okay, this is good. This is 3 days a week. Now we'll move to 4, and 4 will become 5, and then 6 and 7, and now you have a life plan. She'll be in a group home. And we're like, but we don't want her in a group home. This is a kid who told us what dopamine was. At one point, she was being asked by her therapist some basic psychology questions, and I guess she had somehow kind of memorized that section of the textbook, and she was talking about, oh God, I wish I could remember that. I know that was in the book. She was defining different, oh my God, what is it that runs through your body and through the endocrine system? Hormones, hormonal reactions and stuff. It's this is not a kid who should be stuck in a group home. This is a kid who should be preparing for university. So we didn't want to hear that. So, when this abuse happened, we just obviously had to pull her out, bring her home, and find a new solution.
But I think you made an important point when we were speaking, because I asked you, what would have happened if you hadn't had the option of her going for the 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week for those 2 years. And I think your reaction was,
I'm kind of scared to know what that would
She
have
probably would have, I think you said that she probably would have been living in a group home 7
Yeah.
days a week because it just
Yeah.
wouldn't have been
Yeah,
feasible
yeah.
for your family.
You would have kept her home longer until you actually break, right?
Yeah. So I just,
Right?
yeah.
So
I
you
just-
do need to let the steam out, like the pressure valve out, and so I guess maybe, what I would say is don't wait too long to use the occasional respite. Avail yourself on Carrie's Place or any of these service providers. If they offer you 1 night every 3 months, 2 nights every 3 months, take it. I mean, check out the place first and make sure it's the right fit for you and all that, and meet the people who work and understand what the program is and all that. But that generally wasn't the problem. Like, she got her meds, and only one experience where she came home dirtier than she should have that I kind of freaked out. But, because she was still in a diaper and stuff, and so it was kind of disgusting. But generally the care was, until this experience, the care was physically good. And it allowed us to cope to get to the next week and whatever. And I think that strung us along. And then the 3-4 nights a week, that was really, that really saved us. That was horrible why she had to come back, and we actually did find a model where she was still staying out of the house a few nights a week, but it was in a private residence with a woman who's a social worker who had taken in kids before, and it was not too far from our house, and it was just, we were very lucky. And that lasted for it was only supposed to go for a few months, but it went on for, I think, 2 and a bit years. And then we came up with this fantastic plan, because at this point she was 17, so too young to move out of the house as an adult, but getting kind of close. And so we found a way to rent a very small apartment, and on weekends she could go to the apartment with an overnight supervisor, and in the apartment she could learn lots of independent skills like making her bed and this kind of thing. And she did that for a couple of years. And that set her up now for school, where she's living in a dorm.
Yeah.
So it's when I look back, I go, oh my God, how do we have the energy to put all that together? But, you don't look at it in 17-year chunks. You look at it in 1-week chunks. So, yeah.
I'm wondering what you think other parents of kids who don't speak can learn from your experiences or from Carly's story.
I'd say, excuse me, at a very basic level, don't assume can't speak is non-communicative. In fact, we kind of resent the non-verbal label. Tammy more than I don't think Carly and I care all that much, but non-verbal implies no verbiage, no words. But Carly has tons of words. And she said to Ellen DeGeneres, who said, when she asked Ellen, what do you do on weekends? Ellen said, I talk so much during the week. I'm very quiet on weekends. I actually like to go home with Portia. We have dogs, we entertain, but we're very quiet. And Carly said, oh my God, if I could talk, I would talk and talk and talk and never shut up, because I would love to talk. So what I'd say is, if your kid is nonverbal, you will quickly assume that they don't think at the same level as you. And that may be true. I mean, within the autism population, you're going to see the same bell curve that we see in the population in general, which is higher intelligence and lower intelligence. And we're very blessed that Carly is clearly higher intelligence. I don't know where she inherited that. My wife maybe was not faithful, I don't know. But she clearly inherited somebody's brains somewhere. My dad's an engineer, so maybe that's the case. She got his brains. But that doesn't mean that even down at this end of the spectrum, your kid doesn't have things to say about what they want out of their life, or even simple things like, I'm too hot, or this shirt itches, or I don't even like broccoli, or stop talking to me like that, whatever. So, and I think we were very blessed to have Barb, who said, we're just going to keep going and going and going until we find a means of communication, and we will keep inventing and creating. And between Barb and Howard, who's really very creative with technology, we would cook up all sorts of little ways of letting them communicate. So I would say that there's always a focus on the ABA or the behavioral side of it, whether you use ABA or not, doesn't matter to me, but there's a behavioral component. And what Barb would always push is, don't forget the communication component, because some of these outbursts in behavior may be communication related, right? Frustration, or at the very least, if they can tell you a little bit more, maybe you'll know how to program and diagnose better, which is what ultimately really helped us. So I'd say focus on all the different modes of communication, and if something doesn't work once, doesn't mean it won't work a year later, right? Because these kids change. They go through puberty. Puberty affects them just in the same ways the neurotypical population is affected. Modify stuff, right? So once we got rid of PECs, okay, so here's a really good example. So Carly would act out at dinner. She would only eat sort of the same things all the time. And Barb, she wasn't typing quickly or reliably enough to use typing as a means. So Barb would say, you know, write out three things. Let's start with 3 and then we'll move to 4. Nice and neat on a piece of paper, 4 choices, making 1 or 2 of them. I forgot how she did it. Maybe it was 3 things she would like and 1 thing she definitely wouldn't like, or maybe it was the other way around, I can't remember, but so that she would have to discriminate on the list. Like you'd say, okay, you can, if you eat the chicken, you can have one of the following 3 things, you know, liver, no, I'm not gonna point to that, broccoli, chocolate cake, right? So put something highly motivating on that list. And if she points to that, you give it to her, like right then, right there. And so she would use the same concept as PECs, but with words. And eventually she would point to words, and that would be super quick. Or you'd use binary things, like if we were out and didn't have something handy, you'd say, you got a choice. You can have, you know, chicken nuggets or something, and you'd get it a point. Now, we went through periods, even now, where she's not reliable. She'll keep pointing to the left. You'll say chicken nuggets or a hot dog or chicken nuggets, and she'll just keep pointing left. Because of her OCD, she sometimes gets hung up on things. But by and large, these strategies, just keep experimenting with them, because you never know, right? Like, and just keep going with the same one for a while, see if they get used to it, and sort of try that out. I think the iPad is, I think kids are kind of born with the SIM chip in their head or something, because I've seen all sorts of killer stories about cultures where you know, you have illiterate cultures where they don't speak English, and so as a controlled experiment, the technology was dropped off, and the scientists withdrew from the village. This is like in Africa. So they were just left with an iPad device, nothing else. They weren't shown how to turn it on or whatever. And they, you know, hidden mic or hidden camera videoed these kids for about a week or 2. And on the app, one of the apps on this iPad was a reading app. And I remember seeing this, you can probably Google it, it's probably on YouTube. This little village taught itself to read in a matter of months with no communication from the outside world. They were just given an iPad, and through trial and error and working together, and it started with the little kids, and there was always an alpha kid who figured out how to turn it on, and then they would all follow him, and they would turn all theirs on, and then they would figure out, you touch it and this happens. And they learned how to read in their native tongue, or maybe it was even in English, I can't remember, without any involvement. And so I've heard lots of stories from parents who have just given their kid an iPad, get an OtterBox case, get one of these like indestructible cases. We have gone through many iPads now. And you know, there's a couple of great programs on there. I'm sorry, I'm not the best to answer that. I know Blue Review has some support in that area, and there may even be some people in the audience who know a bit more about that than I. We use Proloquo to Go.
And you also use WordQ.
And we use WordQ on the computer, which is has word prediction and a number of features. There's a gentleman in the audience here who also has a program which may be a better WordQ, I don't know. So or Proloquo. It's certainly worth exploring which programs work with your kid, or pick one and stick with it for a few months. And you may be surprised that these kids kind of figure stuff out. Carly, we didn't even know, but she would like went into her room and got on, you know, Facebook, and she was Facebooking totally on her own months and months before, you know, we kind of realized it. It's like, who was with her? I thought you were with her. Well, I thought you were with her. I wasn't with her. Yeah, so I'd say that's what I'd learned. Don't judge a book by its cover. Keep exploring different communication tools, even the old-fashioned ones, the binary, you know, written words. PECs, iPad is critical. These kids should be born with an iPad now. They should be given an iPad with a diagnosis, I think, or an iTouch, a little one. We started with the little one. That's all they had at the time.
So I have one more question, and then we're going to break.
Sure.
You made some really important. Well, you spoke about some of the insights that Carly gave you about her behavior that were quite different from what a professional who was
Yeah.
observing her behavior might have interpreted as meaning.
But she was writing stuff about, when she was 6 that I wish we had known. She talked about something she calls audio filtering, but it's really sensory filtering because it's not just audio, it's visual as well. And one of the things she talks about these kids is, or herself anyway, I don't know if every kid with autism is the same, she has incredible peripheral vision, and I call it peripheral hearing. She can hear things that don't seem to be audible to our ears, or they're audible to our ears as white noise. Just listening to see if there's a conversation in the hallway, for example. I don't hear one now, but had there been a conversation in the hallway, we would be able to block it out pretty easily because my voice is louder. She can't block it out, right? She hears it. It all comes in as noise to her. If people are whispering in the audience, she hears it. Sometimes you'll see her act up on stage if she's on a dais or something for a speaking engagement. She did something last October and she kept getting up and we're like, shit, she's nervous, what's going on? And afterwards she said there was a buzzing in the speaker, and there was at the rehearsal, and we told him to fix it. He said he fixed it, and she said he didn't fix it. There was buzzing, and it was ripping through my head like a knife. It hurt like hell. So she hears stuff, and then she has to compartmentalize it and filter it. And she likened it a little bit to, when your computer has loaded cookies on it, and you'll hear it. I mean, no one has desktops anymore, but you'll hear it whirring, you'll hear it humming. It's because there are cookies loaded, and it's pulling stuff in, and it's processing. Even when you're not at the computer, and that's what her head does. Like she'll hear stuff, load it, and then later she'll process it. And she said sometimes when you see a kid laughing for no apparent reason or crying, like out of the blue, they're just crying, it's because they just figured something out or remembered something that they had been thinking about the other day. And she said, don't discourage it. Or like when they, sometimes these kids get into habitual behavior, and you have to be able to discern whether it's habitual, repetitive, or echolalia. Or she said, sometimes, like I used to like to do something over and over because that was my way of processing it. So that's a bit of a tough one because sometimes it's rote, meaningless behavior that's just repetitive, and you don't want to necessarily encourage that. But sometimes it's what she calls filtering and processing. She talked a bit about her early days when she would hit herself, and she said sometimes it was because I was in pins and needles, I was in a lot of pain, but sometimes I was trying to stop myself from doing what I knew I wasn't supposed to do. So if I had the urge to dump something or break something, you'd see me hit myself, and it's because I didn't want to do it. And she would cry because she said, I'm so upset because I know I'm not supposed to do it. And everyone's telling me, that's naughty, don't do that, Carly, don't do that. And again, she's going, I know not to do it. Can't you help me stop doing it? And so you can imagine the frustration of a life where she's compelled to do these things and everyone scolds her like she's naughty, and that's not helping. So she's scolding herself and she's frustrated and in pain. So some of that, so there's the pain thing we talked about, there's the audio filtering and processing, she could see and hear things. She knew that my wife relapsed. She was the third or fourth person to know that my wife relapsed, whatever that was now, 7 years ago. And my wife and I had been talking about it quite quietly in the kitchen, and Carly was definitely not in the kitchen. I don't even think she was on the first floor of the house. We don't have that big a house, but it's not that small either. And she wrote a letter to her brother that mom was sick and mom and dad are going to lie about it. And what we had actually said was we knew that her cancer had come back, but we weren't sure what the treatment protocol was yet, and we weren't going to say anything to the kids till we knew if she had to go through chemo again. And then it would be a few days till we knew that. And she was very upset, and of course we didn't know she knew, and we didn't know she knew until much, much later. But she could just hear things. And today she says she has a photographic memory, which makes school much easier for her. She can, Howard will sometimes sit with a book. I don't know if they're still doing it because I actually don't see them working anymore, but he would have her tap the shoulder because she doesn't have the motor control to change it. And for some reason, she hasn't really gotten into e-books. I think she will now because some of her books are on her iPad. But for some reason, she never really got into e-books, which you would think she would. So he would have her tap his shoulder, and he would turn the page. And she would tap, and he'd turn it, tap, and turn it. And he's like, come on, because it was tap, 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 tap. So then he gave her, they would give her literacy tests, and she'd have 95% accurate recall. And she said, you don't understand, I can see the paragraph in my head. And sure enough, like on written tests in high school, she would play back paragraphs that were identical. And then once she had to rewrite a chunk of something she had written before, which is really frustrating. But to me, it looked like she had copied and pasted. And I said, did she just copy and paste it from an old document? He said, no, she couldn't find it. It was in something old, so she rewrote it. She missed like 2 words. But it was something she had written a year or 2 before, and it was identical except for 2 words. He thinks she can count cards too. I've only seen her do it once, where he'll, what's the 8th card? 8 of hearts, and she gets it right like 80, 90% of the time. So we're thinking a trip to Vegas as soon as she turns 21.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
no, she just has some really unique skills, and that's not to say every kid has them, and so that's the other unfair thing about this, and I don't want parents to get frustrated that, well, my kid doesn't have it. I think my message is your kid may have more than you think they do. They may not have this, and there might be kids who have way more than Carly. I'm sure they do. I don't begrudge them that. I don't begrudge kids with autism who can speak, who can control their behaviors, who don't do ridiculous, embarrassing things. God love them. I'm glad they have that. We don't have that. That's not for us. But and maybe Carly's skills are not for you. But maybe there are things that your kids do or can do that you don't know, because we never would have known any of this if we had taken the early prognosis as judgment.
It's really important.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break.
Sure.
And then come back for
Great.
questions.
Thanks.